challenges we have is also one of our greatest opportunities.
Tell me, what is it?
There's a lot of information to share.
So many.
And
many things.
Every week, more and more and more stuff happens.
I go through the day, I'm like, oh, that's a good podcast.
Yeah.
We need to talk about that.
Yeah. So today, I've invited Clayton Thomas to join us.
I'm really excited about this guest.
Now, I have to tell you that right before we started, our sound engineer, Brennan, said, what is he? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, he's Clayton. Mm. And then Rodolfo, our video guy, said, is he a doctor or something? And I said, yeah, or something, but I don't know what he is. I know that his parents are veterinarians, I think. I know he recently married somebody who's super smart and super
It's half the battle
pretty.
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that. But I think I want to start out by asking him, like, what he is.
What are you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, hey, Clayton.
Phil, thanks for having me. And to answer your question, it goes two ways. My official title that I put after my name for those people that think it's important is JAG. And it's not because I'm an attorney in the military. I just a guy.
Just a guy. I should have known. He's just a guy.
Dancing monkey. It depends on how your perspective is.
Now, I have to tell you this. Kristen, you probably heard me say this in one of my seminars. And I always preface this by saying, I'm going to share a metaphor. I've even, I think, shared it on the podcast. And it isn't mine. I wish I made it up. I didn't, but I love it. And this is from Clayton. So, Clayton, you know what I'm talking about? The symptoms, the people in the building, right?
Yes, sir.
You want to tell it?
Hey, you know what? You can ad lib or I can go with it. I mean, we can get into it from a philosophical basis. But,
okay.
Yeah, I can start it. You can finish it. However you want to do it.
Well, I think we were speaking together at a conference, and you were up there speaking. I just thought that is the perfect metaphor for explaining the medical system. So you take it.
As it's built, and I've been fortunate because I started, like you mentioned, I started on the wellness side of the world, growing up in a veterinary practice. So I had a major focus on wellness and supplementation, the importance of diet, not only from a human performance standpoint, but also the importance in animals. And I was banned from being a doctor when I was 12. And about 16 years ago, my perspective was changed from nutrition as far as creating wellness to detoxification. And it's in that process, the last 5 years, I spent in the traditional healthcare world. And that's where a lot of the philosophies have been built. And my better half, she's used some analogies that your body is a city and you're the mayor. And my philosophy has been when you look at, some of the cancer issues and, some of the disease states that people are dealing with today, you can look at yourself as like an apartment building or, like a World Trade Center. And you have a fire breakout on a floor or in a few rooms. And what happens in that is you have fire alarms go off, you have warnings, you have smoke, sometimes you can see flames. And the people in the building start to panic. And those that can get out, try to get out. Those that are stuck, maybe if a floor is on fire, try to go up. And they'll end up getting to the roof or they'll get to upper floors and break a window and they'll start screaming for help. That's your body in crisis, and it can manifest in many different ways, and that can lead to a diagnosis. And unfortunately, the traditional thought would be to call the fire department, call the paramedics, and call the first responders. Make sure you can get in there, you get the people out, you can triage who needs assistance, you can put out the fire, and then you can call the contractors and you can work to repair. But the community philosophy is a little bit different than that, because instead of wanting to call the fire department, call the EMTs and the paramedics, they call the SWAT team and they set up to just shoot the people on the roof, and anybody that's screaming outside of a window, they shoot them. And then they say, okay, we got the problem. And you don't have the problem anymore because there's no more screaming. But what typically happens in that environment is sometimes the fire will get locked in an area, and maybe it'll get doused a little bit. But then some people that were in the building go back to a room, they open a door, causes a backdraft, and the whole building goes up. That's healthcare, right? If you're diagnosed with, say, cancer, and you go to your oncologist and they do some of the traditional therapies and they say that they got it all, but they'll preface that with with a couple lines that it will come back. We got it now, but it will return. And it's primarily due to, hey, there's still a fire burning somewhere. We can't get all of it because we're not using the right tools. We brought the SWAT team. We can't repair anything. We can't rebuild. And you're going to deal with it later on, and it's probably going to kill you. But there's your sign. So that's the philosophy. And smarter guys like Phil have been able to take it longer than I have.
No, you did a really good job. I appreciate that. So let me start by asking you a very simple question. And before I do, I'm going to preface it with a statement that I believe you'll agree with. We'll find out. Every case of type 2 diabetes is reversible. Now, I'm also going to say every case of type 2 diabetes was preventable. One more. Every case of type 2 diabetes was unintentionally self-induced. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Only the last part might not entirely be true. You can preface that with a couple components. The first two are absolute. The last one is, I would give it 90%, 95% accuracy that it is self-induced. But there are some environmental factors that lead to that as well. And I think that's the important part, is to really understand, is it self-induced, or are there other factors in play that create the mindset, that create the behavior that lead to the issues? I mean, and that's my...
Yeah, I agree with you. We can argue this from the same side, because I think those factors and the actions and reactions that follow at some point were preventable. So, again, we can say it was self-induced. But let me ask you a harder question now. What if I replaced type 2 diabetes with a different word? What if I replaced it with the C word? What if I asked if cancer is preventable, is reversible, and is self-induced?
Absolutely. I wrote an article that offended a few people. I mean, it was about 6-7 years ago, and I reposted some of the comments on Facebook a couple weeks ago, and I was told I couldn't respond to my own post, but I can't get cancer. I won't ever have cancer. I can't get it. And, there's a couple reasons for that, but I agree with you 100%. Is it reversible? Absolutely. Is it preventable? Absolutely. Is it preventable? And is it self-induced? Yes, because it's what's in you that's causing the problem. But yeah, it's one that is, if you do the right things, you're not going to be susceptible to it.
Dive into that, because I think there's probably some listeners right now who are, either getting mad or who want to know more. Tell us.
Yeah, there's the BS meter that picks up on a couple people. And I think the really important part, and I think the three of us have been fortunate to be able to do this over the years, with Phil's background, with what he's been able to develop in and around the wellness industry and in the performance industry, that research is a major component of what we've done. And we have access to more information now than ever before. And everybody has access to the same information, yet people choose to use it differently, or they're reluctant to use the assets that they have available. And, for me, my perspective, it really came to light when looking at the World Health Organization's data going back to like 1974, when they stated that in 1974 that about 85 to 90% of all chronic degenerative diseases were caused by environmental toxins. And then you can look at the Environmental Working Group data from about 10, 12 years ago, that there's 212 different chemicals and toxins in cord blood of infants. And I think they found that about 100 of those are carcinogenic, which is good, because if you have 200 of them, you only want half of them to cause cancer. Mm-hmm. But if you know what the cause of the issue is, and you can go to Harvard, you can go to Hopkins, you can go to the National Cancer Institute, they're all going to tell you the same thing, that the majority of cancer is environmental. And it's environmental not just because of what you're around, but it's what's in you. So if you're able to address the cause, the etiology of the issue, and this is not just looking at cancer, per se, it's everything from autism to Alzheimer's and everything in between, because the cause is the same. The manifestation of symptoms whether you have abnormal cells that become catabolic and they begin to proliferate and your immune system can't turn them off because your tumor suppressor genes aren't working is one thing. Maybe you have neurological issues, you have inflammatory issues in your joints that they say is an autoimmune disorder. The cause is the same. The way that these issues manifest, because these chemicals and toxins and heavy metals and different environmental toxins that are in your system disrupt every major system of your body, but they do it differently in every individual. So if you address what the cause is, you don't have to worry about the symptoms. You'll never have the diagnosis. And if you make some plans from a lifestyle perspective, and then you're preventative. And so, and the other part goes to, if say you had progressed to the point where you have a diagnosis of an issue because you haven't been able to be proactive prior, there are things that you can do to allow the body to start working again. Once you've been diagnosed with an issue, can again remove what's causing the problem, clean up your environment, allow your immune system to start working properly, because our body is the cure for cancer. We have tumor suppressor genes, P21, P27, P53, that are specific genes that your body has, that when a cell becomes abnormal, they activate in that abnormal cell and cause that cell to die. If your cells are not healthy and functioning properly, those genes stay dormant and they don't turn on. And that's how the proliferation of abnormal cells happens. And those abnormal cells start communicating with healthy cells until the healthy cells to be like them. And then your building is on fire.
Clayton, you're the only person, honestly, that I've ever heard make the statement, I can never get cancer. Now, it would be nice if many people could make that statement, or most people could make that statement, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here. How can you possibly say that?
Because I do things and have done things that have removed and will continue to remove the primary components that cause it. I function in a lifestyle that doesn't create an environment for it to happen. And from a spiritual and intellectual standpoint, I don't put it in my head that it's ever going to happen.
How much of it would you say is going to be from a spiritual and intellectual perspective versus environmental?
You know, if you study quantum physics and you look at where the human existence is and what we're moving towards, with the understanding of how the body is this amazing bioelectrical organism, and that we have energy and abilities beyond what we've been taught for the last, say, 100 to 200 years. Mm-hmm. The ability to manifest. I mean, when The Secret came out, well, man, we're going on like 12, 15 years ago now. Yeah. But the ability to manifest.
By the way, Dr. Ben Johnson was a friend. He was in The Secret.
In and around
Great guy. I miss him.
You can manifest good things. You can manifest bad things. I have this conversation with my wife all the time because she's the most amazing being I've ever met. And she has the ability to create whatever she wants. I mean, she's created molecules that cure cancer. She's an artist in every aspect, but from her mind, she can manifest whatever she wants. But when she's negative, bad things happen. And it's the conversation with her. And she's had cancer 4 times. She's had Lyme disease long before I was here. And she's beat all of it by doing things well and not going the allopathic route. And she lost one child to cancer. Our 15-year-old, who was 2, had cancer. And so she's been through the gamut. But and it's partially because of where she grew up and that her exposure that was there, which also went into the kids. But we have the ability to control our universe. And I think it's the biggest thing for people to understand is there's such a big push. You know, today, whether you make the argument over global warming or if the poles are shifting or if it's just hot and cold out every once in a while because the weather changes, but you need to first be an internal environmentalist. If you don't take care of what's inside you first, nothing on the outside really matters because you have no control over it. The only thing you control is your own internal environment. And you do that through the way you think, through the way you eat, through the way you act, through the way you live.
Christine, all the pieces have now come together.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because I realize why Clayton can never get cancer. His wife created him. He's not real. She can create anything. Look what she created.
A little petri dish. That happens. You know, they create people in petri dishes.
I can say that's true. I mean, in the last 5 years since we've been together, I am a completely different man. She makes me a much better person, and she continues to tell me that. But
sure she does.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I can advise everyone is if you can love a woman the way I love my wife, or if you're a woman, if you have a man that loves you the way I love my wife, life will be good. Because as men, we are nothing without a better half. Because we're insufficient. Women can go along on their own. That's why when men die first in a marriage, the women live till about their 100. If the woman dies first in the marriage, the guy makes it about 6 years.
So I just wanted to kind of go back. And I mean, it's more to make this a little easier for our listeners and viewers. Like if you were to make a list of like top 5 toxins that are most important to avoid or remove, is that something you could do?
Yeah. Mercury, glyphosate, lead, aluminum, depleted uranium.
Okay. So kind of put more color on that, because I think a lot of people, like maybe people know glyphosate because they're seeing all the Monsanto lawsuits, and so they know maybe it's in the farming, whatever. But like, what does that mean? Should they eat organic vegetables?
Well, it's bigger than that, and that's why my first 2, I didn't misspeak. The first 2 are mercury.
Yeah, and mercury, talk about that. Like maybe mercury, they know, okay, my fillings. Yeah,
you might think your fillings, but the hard part is it goes deeper. Much deeper than that. I mean, it goes to conception, and it's the reason that our youngest generations are extremely jacked up right now, because we've reached a point in human history where their starting point is so overloaded with different environmental toxins and chemicals that they can't function right. And mercury is the worst neurotoxin known to man. And let me repeat that. It is a neurotoxin. This is not something that is just stored in fat. It's not something that your liver and kidneys will hold on to. It is a neurotoxin. It gets into your brain. So it is the worst neurotoxin known to man. So it gets into your brain, it gets into your central nervous system, and it disrupts everything. But the bigger part that really isn't talked about is that mercury is an agonist for the negative effects of every other heavy metal and other environmental toxins. It makes everything orders of magnitude worse. And we're all conceived with it. 30% of the mercury that's in a woman is passed into the fetus. So you're inadvertently polluting your children from the get-go. And it's also why miscarriages are so high, because women are pushing all those chemicals and toxins into the fetus, and eventually it kills it and you miscarry. Or you carry to term and you don't have a healthy kid, you just have a kid healthy enough to make it. And then we're exposed to everything in the environment. We get breast milk, which again is pushing more stuff into the kid. And then we've got our other environmental exposures from the air, the water, the soil, the food. We can get into probably some vaccinosis issue because of thimerosal and other adjuvants that are put into vaccines. But we have an issue with biomagnification with mercury, because mercury is a heavy metal. So, and it doesn't go away. It doesn't have a half-life. It's in the environment. So if you're in California with all the gold mining that was done in California, a lot of the streams are loaded with mercury, which are dumping into the water supply. And if you're in Colorado or you're in Alaska, or if you're in, say in Tennessee, where we have a lot of coal mining, there's a lot of mercury, and that's been done hundreds of years ago. It doesn't leave. Everything that we went through in the Industrial Revolution, it's still in our environment. If you look at what China's done over the last 30 years, they've been spewing smokestacks full of mercury to get the jet stream. It's washed over all of us. So it is the baddest boy on the block. And then you throw in what glyphosate does, and you compound that with mercury. There's Stephanie Seneff has done a lot of research where she's really looking at the combination of mercury and glyphosate as a primary cause of autism, because we're seeing rates drop in kids, specifically in boys, and I think there's a direct correlation between the two, and you can't get the stuff out. What's really interesting, if you look down the list a little bit,
African American boys are at highest risk.
And you can get into that because of some of the demographic issues, right? If you look at lead toxicity has some really interesting research on it, that lead toxicity has been shown to decrease IQ. It's been proven to increase rates of aggression and increase rates of unwed mothers. But what's really interesting, where you look at the data on where there's high levels of lead concentration in the soil and in the environment, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta, some of these different markets. And what's really funny, if you look at the demographics of those, they're not white.
Right.
And you look at the murder rates in Chicago, right? That's why they call it Chirac. It's not white people that are doing it. And it's not just a gang affiliation thing. People are freaking polluted.
They're poisoned.
They're toxic, and they're acting accordingly.
I want to kind of bring this to real world for a couple of minutes, because people hear this, and the actions they may take is they may eat less fish, right? They go, okay, mercury, I'm not going to eat sushi anymore. I'm going to get my mercury fillings removed. I had a condition called multiple chemical sensitivity. Thankfully, I overcame it, but it came from mold toxicity. And at some level, I feel as if it gave me insight that other people don't have, because I would walk into a beautiful room and I would feel like I'm going to faint. And it was from the formaldehyde in the carpet and the furniture and the paint. So all of these things that people assume are safe because they're beautiful, even if we talk about pesticides and glyphosate, if you live on a golf course, there's no more beautiful scenery, right? You get a beautiful house on a beautiful golf course, and you're just taking in toxins. Even, I found that when I was really sensitive, certain laptop computers within minutes would make me feel like I'm going to pass out because of the flame retardant. So I got insight into what most people would never know. So I want to ask you this. Fragrances, how toxic can they be?
Very. It depends on what's in them.
So
right?
Here's how I feel. I kind of came to a tipping point where I developed for a period of time a very, very high level of sensitivity. And I would say to people, I know you don't realize it right now, but your perfume is affecting me, which means it's affecting you. But it's hard for them to hear that. So when you talk about cleaning up your environment, even with that recognition and knowing that mercury is bad and glyphosate is bad, what do people do? And of course, we're going to loop around. And Clayton, you wouldn't be sharing this unless you had what we'll call a solution or a part of a solution. But just in real life, in real world, how do people start to clean up their internal and their external environment?
Well, and it's like you hit on, it depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. And it's funny you use the analogy, because I live on a golf course. I live on the first hole of a country club here in Nashville. It's a really nice course. And when they're making the grass look green, I get all excited. But you have to be conscious of your environment, but you also have to have a level of acceptance of the environment that you live in. I love sushi. I live now in the South, so I don't get the good sushi that we have on the West Coast, but I love grouper. And guess what? Grouper is one of the most toxic fish, because the predatory fish, the fish at the top of the food chain, when I talked about biomagnification, you get mercury in the water. So the plankton get loaded with mercury. The krill eat the plankton. The small fish eat the krill. The big fish eat the small fish, the mackerel and some stuff like that. And then the big predatory fish eat those. So you've got this magnification going up the food chain in fish. That's why we are cognizant of, ahi tuna. And, some of we know sharks are really toxic, and we don't eat a lot of shark, but even when they're making shark fin soup, or they're using shark fin extracts, you got to watch out for mercury content. But the larger fish are loaded with mercury. Well, I'm not going to give up eating fish because of that. I'm going to do things in my life to make sure I address those. We only live here. We might live here more than once, but in this life, I get this show one time, and I'm not going to compromise things I really enjoy just to say that I'm trying to live healthy all the time, because that's not living. That's living in fear. And we're meant to live. We're meant to be vital. We're meant to enjoy ourselves. We're not meant to be stupid, but you can do things to make sure you're addressing your environment. And then also, if you know you're doing things that are polluting your body, you can also address those accordingly. So it means you can enjoy them. And then you can make sure that you're getting that stuff out. And I think that's the important part.
So give us some simple ways to get the toxins out
Well,
if we were exposed.
Before we get to that,
Yeah.
People think of nutritional supplements as this is a first step. And I think the word detox is a very common word. But when people think of a detox, they target a colon, a gallbladder, and they do a particular cleanse that we might call a commercial cleanse, or they'll find something online. That's typically, I find, the first step. When they go to something that's more of just a supplement, they'll typically use activated charcoal. Is that true?
Yeah, they'll say you get an activated charcoal, so you do something in your gut, because you'll hear people say that your gut is your second brain, and it controls everything. And there is some truth to that. A lot of stuff starts in your gut because that's where nutrients are done. That's where amino acids are combined and are broken down, and different things are utilized. But your brain is your brain. Your central nervous system controls everything, and the organ cleanses, you've probably seen detox teas, or you hear about the 7-week liver cleanse or gallbladder cleanse or kidney cleanse. And those are great, but it's important to understand that these heavy metals, they're not in your gut. Some of them are stuck in your kidneys and liver, but they're stored in fat. They're stored in your brain. They're around your body in areas that don't include organs, because that's how your body works. If these metals and these toxins were to be stored in your organs, you would die. And our body is innate in protecting itself. So you have a lot of these toxins that are stored in fat. You have a lot of the metals that go to your brain and central nervous system. We'll probably at some point, either now or in the future, talk about CTE, that there's 2 forms of CTE. People are familiar with it because of football. That's not the first real version. The issues are, when it comes to detoxification, it's systemic. It's from brain to toes and everything in between. And it's not something that you can do over the short term. It's not something that you do in 3 days. It's not something you do in a week. It's not a 10-day cleanse. It's not a 30-day cleanse. It's something that you have to do over an extended period of time, because you've been polluted for an extended period of time since you were conceived.
Let me back you up a little bit.
I think that's so important for people to understand, because they always want this quick fix, Right. Like it took you 4 decades to get where you are. Stop thinking we're going to correct this in a week.
Yeah.
Let me back you up to this idea of these are forever chemicals. Like once it's in you, right? So is it possible now with any type of systemic detox or cellular detox to actually rid yourself of these chemicals, or just to kind of manage it?
Absolutely. No, you can remove them. You can remove them passively. You can remove them systemically, and you can remove them slowly, which is really the key. Because I like to think in pictures and analogies, because I'm not very smart. And if you think of your body like a snow globe, and it's been sitting on the shelf, and you look at a snow globe when it's been there for 11 months out of the year, and it's beautiful, right? Because everything's settled in its place and it's there. And if you start doing some of these detox protocols that are a week or even a month, that are really aggressive, that are trying to flush stuff out, your body's natural detox pathways, your methylation process, even glutathione production, are shut down by mercury exposure. So while you're doing some of that stuff, you might be able to flush out a little bit. But what you're effectively doing is taking the snow globe off the shelf and shaking it like crazy. So everything gets kicked up. And then you might be able to turn it over, take off the plug, and take some stuff out, but you can't get all of it. So you plug it back up, and then you set it down again, and you watch everything get redistributed and resettled. That's what happens when you do some of these protocols that are short-term and more aggressive. You don't want to do that. You can hurt people. You can kill people by doing that the wrong way.
Is it an oversimplification? Is it an oversimplification to say first you've got to remove it from the cell and then you have to remove it from your body?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to go into the areas, not just the cells, but you have to get into the areas of the body where these things are sequestered. right? So into some tissues, into fat. You want some methods to cross the blood-brain barrier. You want to get into cells and around cells, and you want to be able to get into and go through organs in different areas. But you want it to be passive, right? You don't want to be aggressive in that, because these toxins and chemicals cause a lot of issues. So where they're sequestered in your body right now, they're doing what they're doing to you. And it's a simple way of saying it. But the issues that you have right now are because those toxins and chemicals are where they are. If you shake up the snow globe, you're probably going to have other issues. I can give you one really good example. I have a really good friend of mine. She became a spokesmodel for a company that was selling a weight loss program. And in about, I think, her first 30 or 45 days, she lost a total of 42 inches, which was amazing, because she was a grandma that lost a lot of weight, and then she looked like the kid's mom and sister. But what happened over a couple months is she went to the doctor, and her doctor diagnosed her with MS. And she called me and she's like, I got a problem. You can't tell anybody this, but my doctor is saying I have MS symptoms. I'm like, yeah, it's because you lost so much weight and you flushed all that stuff into your body, and now it's being sequestered in your joints and in different areas. So it's causing a lot of inflammation, and they think you have MS. So we can clean that up. And we took about 2 weeks and cleaned up a lot of it, and her symptoms went away. And then she continued to do what she needed to do to clean up the rest of the mess.
I want to point out a distinction in something you just said. The doctor said she had MS. She told you she has MS symptoms. Those are very different, right?
Yeah, it's really, really important for people to understand. I mean, if you take one thing from this, my little pieces of wisdom, and this is probably the extent of it right here, you are not your diagnosis. You're not sick. You don't have a disease if you've been told you have one. You're freaking polluted, period. You're toxic. You're not sick. You don't have diseases. You are polluted. And you can fix that. Your body will take care of the rest. You just got to take care of the mess.
So when you and I met, we were attending conferences. You were far more connected than I was with exploration of zeolite as a detox agent, right? And its ability to remove these toxins. And then there were some breakthroughs, and you have really surrounded yourself with these breakthroughs. Am I right?
I've been really fortunate to be at the forefront of that for the last 16 years. And from where I was introduced to the first concept, and I went from being a distributor and selling products because I found that it could be really beneficial for humanity. And then went into consulting, went into manufacturing, and now come full circle, and we're doing manufacturing, consulting, and distribution. So
talk about the benefit of zeolite, and then talk about the innovation or the next wave.
And it's important to understand what zeolites are, because they're a class of volcanic minerals for that matter. You have clinoptilolite, which is really the big boy that has probably the most benefits. You got bentonite, which people are familiar with, chabazite, heulandite, mordandite. Asbestos is a zeolite, but people know that one's not a good one because it has a different structure. It's more needle-like than flat and structured like clinoptilolite is. So we know that one's out. But they're very unique in their nature and their structure, because they're like natural molecular sieves. And if you understand the environment, volcanoes are the largest natural source of emission of toxic gases and heavy metals into the environment. So when the Earth was being terraformed, whether it was through intelligent design or it just happened, you have all these volcanic eruptions that were making land. And they're emitting all these gases and lots of heavy metals, but they're also throwing ash and lava into lakes and seabeds and into the oceans. And through that process, these different minerals and crystals and clays were created that clean up the environment. So we know like cures like, and whether it's our body or if it's nature, there's always a movement towards homeostasis. You always want to find balance. So nature created the best detoxifiers that you could find because it had to. and they've been used for millennia. But what we've been able to do over the last 16 years is take nature's most effective mechanisms for cleaning things up and figured out how to take this naturally negatively charged honeycomb-shaped crystal that is generally regarded as safe as a food additive now, that is completely safe for consumption. And we figured out how to clean out the cage structure and then how to fracture and break apart that honeycomb into much smaller fragments that are nanotized. They're really, really small and that are able to permeate cellular membranes and work throughout your system to do what they're naturally supposed to do, which is grab onto bad stuff, hold onto it, and allow it to be removed. And by doing that, cool things happen.
So why were you so drawn to clinoptilolite? Why did you invest all of this energy in bringing it to your own product release?
It's really interesting because there's been, this is going to sound funky, but hopefully people can equate to this. There's been 2 times in my life where God's tapped me on the shoulder and said, that's your deal. The first time was when I was introduced to this concept 16 years ago. And it's one of those things that I can't really explain. You could say it was supernatural. You can say it was divine guidance. But I had a colleague call me and he's like, look, I think this is going to be really cool. I don't have a scientific background. You do. Take a look at this. I looked at the original patent, got on the phone with the biochemist and said, give me every piece of literature you have on this stuff. And I just started to devour it. And I've done that ever since. This topic, these issues, what we do comes easy to me. You can say, this is one of the things I was meant to do. The second time was when John Sally put me on the phone with my better half the first time. I knew when she said hello that God said, that's who you're supposed to serve. And I wouldn't be doing the first without the latter.
John Sally, a basketball player?
Yeah, he played for the Pistons and the Bulls and the Lakers for a little bit. He's my wingman.
I know him. And I can say this because he said it publicly. He got stem cells with us.
Awesome. Yeah. And John's been raw vegan for like 25 years now. We had a fun conversation about veganism. But the importance of detoxification is of the utmost importance. It is the foundation to wellness. And the ability to take what nature has created and to use that systemically in a manner that your body can use it. And depending upon how you understand how our body works with the environment, these are crystals. So we're nanotizing nature's most effective crystal for detoxification. So from a quantum standpoint, there's some really cool stuff that can happen. But there's this innate intelligence that we're seeing take place with how your body can use these products. It's almost like they're programmed and your body can see, okay, I've got these little guys and we're going to put them over in this area because we have this need to focus in this part of your brain, or we need to work in kidney function, or we need to go get some stuff out of fat. It's really, really interesting that, and we can't explain it yet. It's going to probably take years of understanding and lots of research and lots of case studies to start to analyze. But if you use what nature provides, good things happen. And the one thing I've learned from years in sales and marketing, one of the first things I was taught when I got into the direct sales industry 20 years ago or so, was when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And the same applies for wellness. The same applies in business. It applies everywhere. We're at a point in human history where we have become completely polluted. We've never been so poisoned throughout history as we are now. So we are now being given and provided solutions to clean up the mess. And we are the mess. And then once we clean up ourselves, we can clean up the environment. But you have to do one before you do the other.
So why is this not
That's my journey.
On the front page of every newspaper and on every channel on the news?
Because you haven't told them yet.
Done. I'll do it.
And there's more to it than that. And I think like anything else, it's a matter of time. There are a great many powers that want to argue every point that Clayton made. and insist that this is not true and their products are safe and there is no forever chemical. So that's a big part of it because they have a very loud voice because they have a lot of dollars.
They have the money.
Also, there's so much noise that if you search detox, you're going to find so many different options that how can you tell what's legit and tested and researched from what isn't? You know, we spoke about this, how people go, I'm researching, which means they went on Google and they did a search. It's very different than research used to be, right? You're a research scientist. You've got to be a little offended when somebody goes, oh, I researched this. And you go, what'd you do? And they go, I Googled it.
Right. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. How many pages on Google did you go? And did you use Google Scholar and PubMed, or did you just use Google so you got all the advertising? It's like you got to go to page 50 and then some to really get into some details. And I tell you, my pleasure reading is clinical research typically, because I'm always constantly looking for what the newest data is in different areas, or I'll have someone call me and say, I have this issue and, what do you think? And you start plugging and playing on, different diagnoses and different environmental toxicology issues. And you start pulling up published data from Iran or published data from Croatia, or you look at studies that have been done in the US or in South America, and you start putting all of that data together and go, okay, I have a pretty good reasoning that these are probably the cause of some of the problems. And then how can we address those? And, are the products we're working with able to bind some of these things? And can you go here and can you go there? And then do you have references that you can call on that you can use as a reference to say, hey, look, I have this theory and there's these questions, there's this perceived solution. Am I on the right track? And I'm really fortunate because I married a savant. And she's a lot smarter than I am. And I'm blessed with having really good relationships. When we want to talk about environmental cleanup, or we want to talk about nuclear issues and such, I have friends that work with some of the top nuclear research labs on the planet that I'm able to use as a reference because I've created relationships and bonds with people. And it all comes down to just using what you have. But when you do research just isn't looking at one thing. It's using all of the intellectual capital that you have access to. And, for me, like when I look at fitness stuff, I'll call Phil because he's the godfather. And you just know you have access and you have resources and you want to use all of them.
Kristen, you deal with the invisible, meaning that what is visible to you, a stem cell, is not visible to the person who receives the stem cell.
Right.
So there's a learning curve because they don't understand. And when they first hear about stem cells, they question it and they go, how could this be? And how could this work? But you see what is invisible to them. Clayton, I'm going to say the same thing to you because the action of clinoptilolite when it is working is invisible. And I think you said something earlier about people's minds are polluted, their perceptions are polluted. Advertisers have such power because they've learned to tap into human impulse, which is why you go to the store to buy one item and you leave with 25 items and you forget the one that you came for because the stores are masterful. So too are the sellers of weight loss products. So too are the sellers of supplements and certainly the sellers of drugs. So it's hard to market the invisible because, again, there's so much in front of people's faces that says, I'm the solution, I'm the solution, I'm the solution. And as people continue to fall for this, the truth is our population is getting worse. So can you speak to that a little bit? We deal with detox. We tell people about the balance between stress, load, and recovery. But there's a huge education curve to get them away from whatever they were doing in the past that didn't work. So how do you explain to somebody that the action taking place at the cellular level is what's going to bring you the future you want?
Is that for me?
That's for either one of you.
Man, well, let me take that first, Kristen, because I'll defer to you because I have some colleagues that work heavily in the stem cell space, and it's they're very complementary. And I think you in the general public, you cannot work on a micro level. You have to work on a macro level. And because conceptually, the average American or the average person is really polluted. So their thought process is not capable of comprehending a lot of the concepts that we're going over yet. And you have to give them the broad paintbrush strokes that you can outline the picture before you get into detail. And whether it's stem cells or detoxification, you just go, hey, you know what? You live in a polluted environment, right? They're like, oh yeah, global warming, all this stuff. Great. You live in that environment, right? Yeah. Great. So you're polluted. Yes. You need to get that stuff out, right? Yes. Okay, good. We're making our way. And then you can work your way down that. And then when you get to the stem cell side, the conversation goes the same way. Because, with what we can do from a stem cell perspective, and this is a topic that's really near and dear to me, because when they cloned the first sheep, my better half was on the research team. So, we have fun conversations about this. But if you're going to look at doing stem cell work and you want to put your own stem cells back in, or you want to put new stem cells back in, do you want to put it in a clean environment, or do you want to dump those in a cesspool? Mm-hmm. Well, you probably want to clean up your system as best as possible, so you give those new stem cells the opportunity to be protected and to work in as good of environment as possible. And which also goes to the telomere conversation, right? Because there's been a big push for telomere length, and the signs of premature aging go to the length of telomeres at the end of your chromosomes. Well, it's the environmental pollutants that cause the early degradation of those telomeres. So if you're doing things to try to lengthen your telomeres, but you don't change the environment, you're just spending a lot of money to get nowhere.
Yeah, which is, by the way, what Dolly the sheep died of. Too short of telomeres.
Exactly.
At a young age. So, a couple things that I typically recommend is start simple. Clean up your water, maybe put some reverse osmosis, remove some of those heavy metals from your water. Like, start there. If you're drinking city water, you're drinking a lot of chemicals, fluoride, aluminum. You're drinking, a lot, chlorine, chloramine, a lot of metals that your body cannot process that are creating problems. So, just starting there. And you mentioned early on aluminum. I walk into people's houses and I don't think they realize how many products in their house have aluminum. Everything from their deodorant to their makeup to, cleaning supplies, everything in between. So just removing some of the metals in your life, in your home, okay, we're starting to, make a difference. So just starting simple. And then, if you have an opportunity to detox using some of the products that you're talking about, wow. Now we're talking. And then we start utilizing regenerative medicine treatments. We can really break some inflammatory responses that are going on in your body. You add on some mindset stuff, you're golden. Let's go.
Kristen, we've been appropriately careful in never turning this into a commercial. Mm-hmm. For people who don't know, we operate a life-changing facility, and we're getting people well, and we're making people who are already well better. Mm-hmm. But this is not intended to be a promotion for that.
Right.
So, Clayton, I said to you before we did this, let's not turn it into an infomercial. But I will put under this video your contact information wherever you direct people. But with that said, tell us what you are about to launch or release.
So here, actually, really, really quickly, in the next week, we're launching a distribution company to bring the latest iteration of these products to the market. So one of them is the most advanced systemic detoxification product, the latest iteration of the Zeolite space, which we've been testing for a little bit and is phenomenal. And it's really 16 years of experience that's gone into it. And then a sibling to that, because what we've looked at with the market is, people want to feel good. We need to clean up our system, but we have a drug issue in this country, whether it's opioids or if it's marijuana or if it's the chemical of choice. And it's not due to just the addiction issue. It's due to people being really polluted, and their brains are telling them that they need to feel better. And so they start searching for something to give them that dopamine hit. It could be video games. It could be porn. It could be food. It could be exercise, which is good. It could be chemical induced. So we have a product that goes along with Clean Slate, which is the detox side that we call Zero In. And it's a nototropic because it's non-chemical derived. It's all natural, but it's a combination of like 5 dopamine agonists that in about 10 minutes kicks in. Your body produces a lot of dopamine and it increases mental clarity and focus, and you feel amazing. So we'll have those available here next week, I think.
I want to ask you a hard question. Anything that spikes dopamine has a propensity to become addictive. Does this?
You know, that was a question that came up with my kids last night because my 15-year-old, who interrupted us a little bit earlier because he wasn't taking it and he's got a little bit of ADD, and he last night he's like, I have to have these now. This helps me focus. And we had that conversation because this isn't spiking dopamine. It's feeding your body the nutrients it needs to naturally produce more of it when needed. And it lasts about 5 hours. But could you make the argument that this could be addictive? Yeah, you probably could, because dopamine is what causes most addiction.
Sure.
But if you have a natural means of procuring it that is inexpensive and is all natural and does in no way affect your body's natural ability to produce dopamine, that's not a bad thing. And from a marketing perspective, if you have a natural supplement that is a nutraceutical that they say is so good it's addictive, well, you might want to share that with your friends, and we've got a model that can monetize it.
The clinoptilolite product, Clean Slate.
Yep.
This is the detox agent, and you suggested that you do it passively and slowly. So this is not something that you take and you feel, correct?
Well, you can feel it. You don't feel it per se, right? Because the crystals themselves, they're nanoparticles, they're really small, and they're passive in their process, right? So it's like working with a hoarder. You know, Phil, we were talking about this earlier. So if you go into a hoarder's house, so if you watch hoarders on TV, you've got someone that's, you know, junk in their house piled to the ceiling. You got toilets and washer and dryer and tires, maybe a car in the front yard. And if you go in the first couple hours and you remove some of those toilets and, you know, big stuff from the front yard, and you go in and you grab some of the really easily accessible stuff in the house, you make a really big difference really quickly, and you can see it. It doesn't mean you're done, but you can see changes. And doing the protocols that we have as a detox process work the same way. I mean, I've had people see results in an hour. Usually within a couple days, people will feel stuff start to change. Within a couple months, you've had dramatic changes a lot of times. Everybody's a little bit different because we are all toxic in different manners. And like when, Phil, you were talking about the importance of research and clinical studies, we are all a clinical study of one. We're all biologically unique because we were all conceived in different environments, hopefully from different people. And the way we're impacted by our environment is different. So the things you do, the things you use are going to impact you differently. And it's the hard part when people ask me, and Phil, when they ask you, or Kristen, they probably ask you the same thing. It's like, okay, how is this going to work for me? I couldn't tell you. I've never worked with you before. You're different. Mm-hmm. Your results are going to be different, but we know the mechanism of action is the same.
Right.
And you're going to respond to those based on that. But is it going to hurt you? No. Will it help you? Yes. Everything else in between that is how your body responds to it.
You know, my metabolic reboot program begins with the thought that we are all the same, but we are all different. And it sounds contradictory, but it's not. It's in line with what you just said.
Yep, absolutely.
But for that reason, we can't answer the question, how many pounds will I lose or how long will it take me to lose 10 pounds? It's very individual. What we can guarantee is you will mobilize fat and burn it as fuel, and you will weigh less 21 days from now, and your body composition will change dramatically. So too will your health, and so too will your energy. But if you weigh yourself on day 4, you're making a massive mistake. So I asked that question for that reason, because if people start taking something, they're often very quick to make judgment and go, it's not working. I'm not noticing anything. So although we are different, you said some people will feel something right away. It's not the kind of product that you take and you go, oh my God, I feel great. I need to get more. You've got to have the persistence and the patience to realize you got a lot of stuff that has to be released, correct?
Yeah, and you've got to grab it. And like you were touching on, if you're doing a metabolic makeover and you have people that are looking to burn off fat, it is of the utmost importance that as you're burning off the fat, that you're using some tools that will bind all of the toxins and chemicals that were stored in that fat. So that way, one, you're going to improve your metabolism, you're going to improve your intracellular water, you're going to improve metabolic function. You are then also protecting yourself from all of those chemicals and toxins being placed somewhere else because, and Phil, you can speak to this, the data. I mean, how many people lose, 10, 20, 50, 100 pounds and then 6 months later put it all back on and then some?
Most people who lose that amount of weight put it back on and then some. The great majority of them do, yeah.
And they do because their environment didn't change.
And they're focused specifically on losing weight. And in that process, you can do things that work against your health.
Yes, very, very, very much so.
You can lose weight and destroy metabolism at the same time. Yeah,
and you can destroy your body. And if you do stuff right, and I think if you're listening to this, I'll exclude myself. You have really, really smart people to use as a resource. And this is valuable because you're blessed with having really bright genius minds to be able to get information from. And I would recommend you use as much as you can.
I'm going to write down. You can include yourself. I'm going to just pave the path for some future talks that we're going to have together. Everything you're talking about, does it have application in helping people who have children with autism?
Oh, absolutely. And it goes to etiology, right? And you have arguments that are being made about, in the anti-vax community. And I'm not an anti-vax person. I'm anti-adjuvant. I don't like a lot of the chemicals and pollutants that they put in the vaccines. And I would prefer to refer to what's being done in Japan and what the UK did about 25 years ago when they banned thimerosal and they only use single-dose ampules for any vaccines. And they don't have the issues that we have here. But you also have to go back to conception. And then you really have to work from there, forward. It's the issues that we see when you see these kids tip is the tipping point. It's not the full cause. That's what pushed them over the edge. And they're not gone. I've worked with loads of kids that have been, we'll say, damaged. And I have some phenomenal people that we can use as references that would love to talk about their experiences. But these kids aren't gone. They're not damaged forever. They're behind a glass wall. Mm-hmm. And they're there. A lot of times they're genius in areas that need to be discovered because they can apply their brains differently because they've been wired a little bit differently. But if you can remove what's causing those blockages or causing the disconnects, then you can see behavior change. And that opens up the conversation on CTE as well, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which people are familiar with. But the real issue is called chronic toxic encephalopathy. Mm-hmm. So,
which has nothing to do with getting your head bashed in by a lineman.
There you go.
Yeah. Let's go the other end of the spectrum. Well, Alzheimer's.
The traumatic one. Same thing. I mean, it's just a later onset, right? It's the same etiology. And this is where chronic toxic encephalopathy comes in because it's the true clinical diagnosis for dementia and Alzheimer's. And what it is a buildup of mercury and aluminum in the brain that will congregate to specific areas that damages neurons and causes a buildup of tau, which the tau is the protein that researchers are finding is the tar basically that's blocking neuroreceptors that causes memory issues. And how that applies into some of the sports that we're playing today is if you have a head injury, and my 15-year-old just had a concussion a week and a half ago. So he's being held out of sports. And it's kind of funny to watch how his brain's functioning now because he really doesn't think very well. And doesn't think very well just being a 15-year-old boy, but you give him a head injury and it gets really fun. But what we see in the concussion sports, whether it's women's sports, boys sports, men's sports, and I have to put the difference between the two. Women are women, boy and men are two different things. But the issues that happen there is when you have a head injury and you have a concussion, you have a bruise basically, or that happens in your brain. You have this increase in ionic activity that happens in that area. So what happens is you create a magnet in your brain for all those heavy metals. So they're drawn to that area. So you have this congregation of metals that happens much, much earlier because of these events. So that tau buildup happens much earlier in life. So you can have memory issues. You can have aggression issues. You have these issues that we typically look at with dementia and Alzheimer's, but now they're happening earlier in life. It's the same etiology. It's just accelerated. So you have to know what the cause is, so you can look at the scenario and go, oh, this is the same thing, it's just different.
So preventable, maybe. Reversible, you say yes.
In many, many aspects, right? Because if caught early, you can get really good results. And I'll give you an example. Pat Summitt is probably still regarded as the greatest female basketball coach in history, probably the greatest women's basketball coach ever. Unfortunately, she died early with us, or on us. I got to work with her in the later stages. And when ESPN ran the story that she had gone, because she had Alzheimer's and dementia, because she grew up in Middle Tennessee, was completely mercury toxic, miscarried 12 times before having her only son. Wow. And had breast cancer around 50, which I was able to work with her then. We got rid of it. And then later on, when she had full-blown Alzheimer's, I was able to work with her again. And when she followed some protocols, she went back in for her follow-up, and she was actually improving. And ESPN ran a story about it because the University of Tennessee announced that her labs and her performance on some of their tests had actually improved. And this was a big thing. But then they stopped doing the protocols that we were doing, and she got worse and died. So what it really comes down to when you're dealing with some of these progressive issues, some of the damage you can't reverse, but life is meant to be lived well. And you want to have as long of life as possible, as long as it's quality. So if you're able to add quality time to your life, you're winning. We may not be able to reverse all of it, right? But if you're able to create quality, then you can do better. But if we're looking at neurological stuff, and you're able to clean up stuff the way we are able to do, and then you're able to do some work with really, really good stem cell therapy, then you've got a 1-2 punch to really do some fun stuff. And we're starting to see some of that happen. So it's not a one trick pony. There isn't one silver bullet to say this is going to take care of everything, right? There isn't one food that you can eat that's going to take care of you for the rest of your life. There isn't one thing that you can drink that's going to take care of everything you need, unless it's Irish whiskey. Right. Ask Conor McGregor. Correct. And it's understanding that you have to have, a tool bag, a box. But when you go fishing, you don't dump the whole tackle box in the water. You might start with one specific lure because you're going to see how that works, and then you're going to build on it. And that's your philosophy for wellness too. You have to build your foundation, and then you build on it. And you're fortunate if you're here to have access to a lot of phenomenal tools from really, really smart people. Yeah, Clayton, we have to wrap it up, but I want to do a few things. One is I need to apologize to Kristen. Two, I need to thank you.
So let me start with the apology. Kristen, I'm sorry. We have an hourglass that sits here on the table, as you can see, and the sands of time ran out a long time ago. And Kristen asked me, she goes, can we cut it short today? Because my parents are in town and my family's here. And I said, yeah, we'll just kind of zip through it. So I apologize for that. And I apologize to your parents and to your sister and to everybody. But Clayton, I want to say to you, not only thank you, but the fact that we kept going beyond the sands of time means that you had something interesting to share. And you are very eloquent, and I don't know if it's genuine humility or produced humility, but there's this humble part of you that says, I'm not that smart. I think you're smart. I just want to tell you that. A smart guy is telling you you're smart. And the last thing I want to add is we're going to have you back, and we're going to talk about a whole lot of things from vitamin K to, we can just go. But I think long term, your calling is to write a book about making marriage work, because I've never heard anybody speak as highly of their spouse and their relationship as many times as you did in a show like this.
Well, I can say thank you. A couple of my buddies told me, it's like when someone gives you praise, that's all you should say is thank you. Kristen, thanks for not kicking us off and tell your family.
It was really a pleasure. I didn't want to end early, so it was good. It was good. Worth every minute. But
you can always say that good people bring the best out of you, and I just tell people I'm a dancing monkey. So if someone turns the crank well, you're going to get good activity. So if you feed me well, I can speak well, but no, I can speak to the familial aspects. I was married for 14 years, and for 7 of that, I realized that it may not be the right environment, and decided that it was my best interest to try to be happy. And then when I made that decision, John Sally introduced me to a pegacorn, which you've probably never heard that term. It's a unicorn with peacock Pegasus wings. And when you meet that person in your life, and I don't think we all get to meet that person, but when you do, and as a man, we are made to serve and to be blessed, to be able to serve who God put me here for, is one that I'm happy to talk about.
What is it called? The unicorn with Pegasus wings? What did you call it?
A pegacorn.
A pegacorn. So I have to ask you one last question. Are you microdosing LSD?
I have never done it yet.
Maybe that's in your future. That'll be our next live podcast. We'll all take something and we'll see where it goes. Clayton, you're awesome. I'll talk to you during the week. Good luck with your launch, and we have to speak privately and figure out how we can unify what you do with what we do, because we've got a lot of lives to change and a lot of lives to save. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.